Anyways, welcome everyone. I'm really excited that you're all here tonight and that we are able to start our catechesis on the elderly. Um, so I wanted to let you know a little bit about how it's going to unfold tonight. First of all, Amanda and I will introduce ourselves so you get to know us a bit. Then we're going to go over Pope Francis's catechesis and comment on it. We will then open up for questions or comments. If you want to ask a question or comment, please raise your hand using the Zoom raise your hand button. So if you're not sure what that is, you'll see at the bottom of your screen a reaction, but a happy face. And if you click on the reaction happy face, you get a series of things that you can do. You can clap, you can give a thumbs up, and you can raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, it will bring you to the top of the queue and we'll get to see you. And then we can bring you into spotlight into the spotlight and have you join the discussion group. So you can either ask a question or make a comment. If you don't want to be part of the recording, you can just type your question into the chat bar and we will read it. And then that way you'll get your question answered. So let's start. And Amanda, I'm going to get with you starting by introducing yourself.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's a joy to have you here with us. This has been a dream to study intentionally Pope Francis's catechesis on the meaning and value of old age, because I really think this is an unmined treasure of the church and of his pontificate. Everyone knows that John Paul II did a series that became known as Theology of the Body, with his Wednesday audiences focused on marriage and the family. And it's so poignant, it's so significant that Pope Francis chose to devote 18 of his Wednesday audiences to the meaning and value of old age, and especially the perspective of the Bible bringing to bear on the value between intergenerational solidarity, relationships between grandparents and the elderly, and what is sometimes called the symphony of society. Beautiful phrasing throughout this that can really fire up our moral and spiritual imagination. I think I was really captivated by Pope Francis's commentary on the elderly because it struck a chord with me personally. It struck a chord with the kind of relationship that I had with my grandfather. I had a Polish Jewish grandfather, my dad's dad, and he was the one with whom I was closest. He lived with my family for several years during my high school and university years, and this relationship was absolutely pivotal and continues even after his death to bear much fruit. And there's something that Pope Francis said that touched me to the core, that really helped me to see that he gets it. And this is what he said about grandparents that I found so evocative and kind of resonant to my own relationship with my grandfather. He said, "We, the elderly, can remind young, ambitious people that a life without love is arid. We can say to young people who are afraid that anxiety about the future can be beaten. We can teach young people to in love with themselves that there is more joy in giving than in receiving. The words of grandparents have something special for grandchildren, and they know it." I found that so beautiful, and I was actually able to send that to my grandfather, and he had it at his bedside in his last days, that quotation. And yeah, it's just so extraordinary to have a special relationship with a grandparent. It's something that is not necessarily ubiquitous in our culture today for various reasons. And yeah, so I would just say I also got closer to Pope Francis and more sensitive to this catechesis series because for the past 2 years, I was living in Rome. I was in Rome the past 2 years at the Pontifical Gregorian University. I'm born and raised in Calgary, but I did my studies both in John Paul II in Poland, and then most recently, I studied the resurrection of the dead in Rome. So being in St. Peter's Square, listening to some of these addresses, receiving not only the words of Pope Francis, but also the visible witness in his own vulnerability as a sign for the church of the attention to which he's calling us. These are just some of the things. And I'll turn it back to Nicole to sketch a little bit about the logistics of our meeting and to introduce herself as well. And we won't take always so long with an introduction, but just to give a little bit of a taste, because I know that each of you have your own reasons why you said yes to join this series. I know that for each of you, there was something in this for you. that appeal to you. And we're so touched by the response we've seen from all of you signing up. And so back to you, Nicole.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about doing this as well. I've been working with Amanda for a number of years now, working on with Physicians for Life in particular, and dealing with some of the crises we see in our country, particularly around euthanasia and what we call the throwaway culture, where people are discarded when they're no longer considered useful. And a lot of my work previously to this was also with the elderly, with my company, Fit Minds. And I've really, I think, always felt a passion for working with seniors and particularly in palliative care. And that's been really, sorry, just muting people. That's really been a motivator for me. And so when Amanda suggested we take on this catechesis of Pope Francis's, it really, I got really excited about it. I thought this was something I would really like to spend some time thinking about, reading, reflecting, and praying. And I hope that all of you through the next year, as we go through this, take these catechetical writings to your own prayer or reflection and just see how they move you in terms of taking action or making changes in your own life. I've already found so much in this first one. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go through and comment on the first catechetical reading. And then you can ask questions, we'll have a discussion. At the end of this, we will create a video. So we're recording it right now. So we're going to cut it a little bit so that it's a little bit cleaner. And then we will put it up on a YouTube channel and send you a link so that you can watch it or share it with your friends. Each session will be a standalone session, so you don't have to come to all of them. So if you miss one, don't hesitate to jump back in. I know everyone has busy lives. Sometimes it's hard to get to all the things you want to do. And what else? I guess they're happening about every 2 weeks. So we'll send you a reminder with the Zoom link. The Zoom link is always going to be the same. So if you want to just save that someplace and keep it handy. And then finally, I will be putting the dates on the website. I know that was a bit of an oversight on my part. They're on the registration form, but once you register, you have no way of finding where they are again. So I will get them on the website so you can keep track of them that way and get them into your calendar. And Amanda, I don't know, is there anything else that's specific to this?
I think that's about it. So we'll get better and better each time that we come, and we welcome your feedback by email. As Nicole mentioned, and as we said in the email, we're going to start it off. Nicole and I will begin having a kind of dialogue, unpacking it together. And as we speak, feel free to post comments in the chat, post questions, and then we'll be calling on you to share your reflections once we just do a little preliminary conversation back and forth. And so we'll get started with that. And then we really look forward to hearing from you. And again, expect it to get better each time. We're doing this as a bit of an experiment. And we're really, excited to have you in on the experiment with us. So why don't we dive in now, Nicole?
Sure. Yeah. So why don't you start? Why don't you set out the framework of kind of some of the things that Pope Francis is trying to do with this catechesis?
Yeah, so there's definitely an emphasis in some of the Wednesday audiences on specific figures throughout the Bible, and it's neat to look at, as Pope Francis says toward the end of this one, he wants to kind of elevate the figure of the elderly, because he's talking about how we have this exaltation of youth, and there is a risk to that. There's a risk that he even says harkens to some of the disordered rupture between generations and between all the stages of life that we saw amidst the totalitarianism of the 20th century. Whenever some lives are discarded or peripheral because of vulnerability, that actually puts the entire human experience into a kind of precarious state. And so I think first and foremost, I just point out that he's talking about how old age right at the beginning is not just a quantitative matter. The fact that there are more and more elderly than have ever lived because of longevity, that's kind of the level of demographics and statistics. But he says that it's not just a question of quantitative change. The unity of the stages of life is at stake. Somehow everything is threatened if we don't grasp something of the continuity between the beginning of life and its natural end. If we don't see and if we don't situate ourselves as being in relation to those other phases, we actually become uprooted and we become anxious. And I think that Pope Francis is really diagnosing even some of the crises like identity politics to this kind of detachment from roots. And he's talking about how with the elderly are all the roots of the culture from which we can grow and be grounded. So I'm just really struck by that there's something about how those who are old must maintain, he says, not just knowledge of, but conversation with the young. That's very important. And the young need the dreams of the old in order to inspire them to look up from their smartphones. It's really this kind of mutual reliance and interdependence. And I'm not sure if we can always give an account of why that is. Can the older people explain why they truly have need of the young? Or are older people sometimes full of cynicism and distrust of the young? Are younger people genuinely curious about the experiences and insights of older people? Or do we think we know better and that there is a being out of touch? And what are the concrete manifestations of this rupture between the conversation of generations? So those are some of the initial lines, and I think sketches the tenor of what he's getting at in terms of this really concerns all of us. So while it's a series on the meaning and value of old age, there's a reason why I'm here, because there's something, and why some other younger people on this are here, because it's really not just about old age. It's really about the entire human experience.
Yeah, so I just want to jump in on that because I thought one of the things that he really emphasizes is this whole sense of people being discarded, that when they're no longer materially useful, they're not economically producing, then they are discarded and they lose value. And we think of them as having less value and we don't care for them the way we should. And he's really drawing attention to that, which I think is very poignant, particularly coming through the pandemic. That was really hard for people. Many seniors were left isolated and completely cut off in ways that were very inhumane, if you think about it, in terms of what's the most important thing to them was the relationships with their families, and they were cut off from their families. And so I think that's really something that we can reflect on. It's made me think a lot about sort of initial reactions during the pandemic, and then as things went on, how social fabric kind of unraveled because people were not connected anymore. And it really gives you the importance of the connections. And I also like the way he really emphasizes the need for friendship between the elderly and the young. And I think, and I know that you've had that experience, especially with what you're doing right now, some of the interviews you're doing and the kinds of conversations you're having. And I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, how you've kind of, what you've taken from that.
Sure. Well, I'm interviewing people all the time and blogging about it at dyingtomeetyou.com. So if you'd like to read some of my interviews, you can check them out there. One of my recent interviewees is an 88-year-old woman in Calgary named Christine. And I got connected with her because everyone said, you've got to meet Christine, because at age 81, she decided to get her first tattoo. She had always discouraged her kids from getting tattoos. So it was a bit of a shock when she called up her kids and said, I'm going to the tattoo parlor. The only thing more shocking was what she actually got tattooed on her. And that is, she got a tattoo that says, "Don't euthanize me." This is several years ago. And she got it because she wants to raise awareness about how, as she puts it, like with abortion, euthanasia is the murdering of the inconvenient. And I think that is a very precise way of putting what Pope Francis is getting at with this term about throwaway culture. If we do not know how to contend with the inconveniences of life, then we are not prepared to face up to suffering, caregiving, and end of life in a natural way. So it's just very interesting to meet people, to hear their stories, and to see the kind of directness with which people in their everyday experience reflect on these things.
Okay, great. Another thing that he talked about in this letter or catechesis, which I think was really interesting, was talking about projects of existence. So he said, like, we have care plans, but we don't have projects of existence. So what do you think he meant by that? When you think of projects of existence, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I love that expression. And it's even, I think it rhymes in Italian. It's like we have projects of assistance, but not projects of existence. And it's a little bit more poetic there. Assistance plans, but not existence plans. And honestly, it reminds me of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. In his book on the insecurity of freedom, Rabbi Heschel is talking about why do we have all these directors for recreation and not for the sort of intellectual and spiritual good of seniors living in retirement homes. And this is something I also hear in my interviews, that very often a Catholic mass is put under the recreation coordinator's auspices, and it's kind of treated as, yeah, as a recreation activity. There is a sense in which liturgy is leisure, but it's not the same as Scrabble or something, as fun as Scrabble is. I really like Scrabble, but like, we've got to have this separation where there's an awareness of the higher things, and that those who are nearing the end of life are most interested or ought to be most interested in, as another interviewee said, she said, 95-year-old woman named Rita, and she says, death, judgment, heaven, hell. I'm 95. That's what's on the table. These are the priorities. And so, yeah, I think that projects of existence refers to the projects that concern the existential character of life. What does it mean to be human? What is life actually about? What is my ultimate destination? How do I live in relationship with others? It's not simply a matter of meal plans or medications. It's about the spiritual health of my life.
So do you think that in your experience, people who are older are more comfortable talking about those things? Or are they as maybe tongue-tied about them as younger people sometimes seem to be?
Well, whenever speaking about an entire demographic, it can be difficult to make sweeping categorizations. There's as much variety in a demographic that is represented by millions of people as all of the people who compose that demographic. So I wouldn't want to generalize too much, although I would say it is notable how, and I noticed this always growing up, I throughout my life have been a practicing Catholic, and that's always been important to me. And yet for my entire life, the people who faithfully attend mass regularly are usually older. And so growing up and witnessing this, there are a few different impressions that form. Either, well, they must not have anything better to do. That might be a one impression, but eventually it's more a question of maybe they're onto something. Maybe there's a clarity that comes when you get older, where you are able to distill what is really essential, what is worth paying attention to. And traveling the world and seeing that phenomenon of older people in every place of worship in every country, either they're bored or they're attuned to their project of existence.
Yeah, I think likely they're more attuned. And actually, it's gonna help me go to the next point, because I think this is something you alluded to earlier, but I would like to explore it a little bit. He says, kind of about halfway through, at the end of the second page, if you printed it out, he said, isn't the most serious backlash of the pandemic precisely the sense of loss of the young? The old have resources of life already lived, and the young don't. Like, the older, you have more resilience because you've kind of lived through things, you've recovered, you've made mistakes, had your life fall apart, put it back together. The young haven't necessarily had that. And so we go through something very challenging like the pandemic, and there seems to be a lot of rootlessness among the younger generation, that maybe if there was more of a connection with the elderly, they would be able to find their roots again. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I that's part of it. I I'd like to hear a little bit more from you on that.
Well, I do think that the longer you live, I'm not going to say how old I am now, but the longer you live, the more things have happened to you that you think, wow, I don't know how I'm going to get past this. And then you look back later and you find that there was fruit that came out of it. Maybe it was really hard at the time, but you learned lessons. Your life went in a direction that you weren't expecting. But when you look back, you're glad it did. And so you can say, yeah, tough things happened, but something good came out of them. And so when something hard again happens, like the pandemic, you start to look for the good that you can mine in those situations. And I'm not sure young people have that. Well, they don't have that experience. They can't have that experience. And so they don't have that resource to draw on. And I would think that that is something older people can give to younger people, to give them perspective, to give them hope, to help them see that there still is a future, even though times may be really tough.
I think that's right. And I think back to when I traveled to Germany and Poland as an 18-year-old. I went on a Holocaust study trip with 60 students and 2 Holocaust survivors. And all of these 60 students from ages 18 to 30 were absolutely captivated by the 2 survivors with whom we were able to travel to sites and listen to their stories. And I do think these stories of resilience so much exceeded what any of us could fathom in our own lives being able to cope with. And it was this extraordinary ability not only to have survived what they had survived, but then to return to those sites year after year with groups of young people and tell us those stories again and again. Yeah, I think often people have a kind of threshold where they think one more thing and I won't be able to live anymore, one more thing and I won't be able to cope. But when we get out of ourselves and when we listen to the experiences of others, we realize that people are able to bear so much more than we imagine, than they imagined. And when we share those stories with one another, it can become a massive source of consolation and inspiration about what actually is possible.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's so true. We've come up close to the time when we said we were going to start taking questions. So anyone has questions or comments, just raise your hand and we'll bring you onto the screen, or you can type it in and we'll pay attention to you that way. But we'll just keep talking and hopefully people can interrupt with questions. So one thing that I found really interesting as well is this whole idea of creating conversation spaces between the older generation and youngsters, and thinking about how to do that. And I know that sometimes young people feel uncomfortable reaching out to older people. So as a young person, and you're going to be the young person, I'm going to be the old person, how would you, like, what signals would you look for if you wanted to have a conversation with someone who is much older than you?
Well, again, to the point that it's impossible to generalize, and it's not simply like any old person is interesting to me. Some are certainly more interesting than others, just as young people might strike you or spark you more readily than others. So I think what really strikes me in looking toward older persons is when there is a kind of joy in life that is full of an openness to novelty. Because a kind of stereotype about older people is unable to change ways, stuck in a kind of mentality. And yet, I know many, many older people, and the ones who I consider true mentors and friends are the ones who are constantly encouraging me to be audacious, who say, go for it. It's never been tried before. You can try it for the first time. You don't know if you can do it. I think you can. It's that kind of optimism and encouragement that I think is particularly a gift that grandparents give to their grandchildren, a sort of unbelievable amount of belief in them that is so good for a person's development. So yeah, I think that's what I really crave in the older people who I seek out as friends and mentors, that boundless confidence that they have in me, that lifts me up and fills me with hope for my future too.
Actually, that's one thing that's, I think, grandparents can really give their grandchildren, is that incredible amount of support, right? Like we think that you are amazing, you can do amazing things, and you just never kind of back away from supporting your grandchildren. Okay, Linda has a question here. So Linda, I'm going to bring you down here. Can you turn on your video?
Oh, turn on my video. Oh boy.
Yes. So we can see
Okay.
we can see your forehead.
Okay, there we go.
Okay. Very, very good. Okay, great. Yeah.
So, what it was in my question, how about people, seniors who don't have grandchildren? Because there's some seniors that don't have children or grandchildren. How do they connect to the youth? Like if you have your own family, you have your children, your grandchildren, maybe, nieces and nephews with their children, but it might be limited. So how do you encourage those elderly?
That's
That's my
a great question. That's a great question. Okay, I'm gonna like release you from the spotlight, but
Okay.
but let's talk about that question. I think that's great, and I think that's a hard question, especially. I mean, it depends where you're at, but one way that I think you can really help is if you can volunteer in to work with children, like working in the elementary schools. I don't know if you were telling me about this, Amanda, or if I was talking to someone else, where they were using that as almost a therapy for seniors to do volunteer work in elementary schools, and they found that both the children did better because they had the more intensive attention, but also the seniors did better. Cognitively, they were better. They were getting out of bed in the morning because they had a place to go. They physically, like they were just healthier because they were involved like this.
Mhm. Yeah, there's always a kind of audacity that's required for striking up relationships, especially if they're a little bit unconventional in our society. And so sometimes there are initiatives that are really conducive to this. And one example during the pandemic was the parish that I was attending in Ottawa started up a phone buddy system where at first it was supposed to be that young people phone seniors and pray the rosary with them, but neither the seniors nor the young people really wanted to spend all of that time praying the rosary. So some did, but mostly they just talked. And that's what people were really hungry for, was the connection to be able to converse. And I got matched up with a man named Don, 89 years old. His wife had died 1 year prior, and we had calls every Wednesday night for about a year. And it was incredible. I'd never met him before, but we were assigned to one another. In a sense, we were entrusted to one another through this kind of parish initiative. And I found it so easy to connect with him. And it became a very special relationship. Though I had never met him, it was in the midst of the pandemic. My life kind of revolved around my work at that time. And it was very intense work. And I remember that during one of our phone calls, he asked me how I was doing. And I started to tell him about all of my work projects and the demands and the constraints and my relationships with colleagues and all of this. And he listened very patiently for probably 5 minutes. And then he said, "And how are you?" And I was so touched because it was asked with such genuineness. And I think that's like another gift that older people can give the young, is the patience to actually be curious in how we're doing. And we don't have that many relationships that are like that. So it can be very startling, and it can accelerate trust really quickly.
Yeah, and actually, I just want to take off on that point, is that I think that's something that churches can do, right? That they can organize events like that. And it's a great way to give the youth a service project that can be really meaningful and add value to the community, to reach out to elderly parishioners who might not be able to get to church so easily or might be more isolated. So Linda,
Yeah.
that's a project for you at church, to start that kind of group. Okay, Hans, I'm going to bring you down here, and we're going to let you ask your question.
Okay, my apologies. My name is Kathy. It's my husband's name.
I was thinking that you didn't look like a Hans. So, anyways, okay, very good. Okay,
a German name with an Irish accent, so it makes it even more complicated.
Yeah.
I just wanted to really thank you for the opportunity to join you today in this fabulous and wonderful task that you've taken on. When reading the catechesis that with Pope that Pope Francis put together, a line just jumped at me, and I have underlined it and I've highlighted it, and it says, "If grandparents fall back on their melancholies, young people will even look more to their smartphones." And you know, I'm Irish, so I'm a bit of a storyteller kind of thing. But I've really, I really paid attention to that line, because that's what makes a separation that can make the great divide even wider. And I'm blessed. I have 3 grandchildren, and they're 12 and one is 15. And I'm learning to wait for the question. Like, Nana, what was it like? You know, or Nana, you know, when you were this age, what was it like? So instead of me coming forward and just with all my stuff saying and making the comparisons of the here and then, I'm learning that kind of patience, and I'm trying to learn the iPhones and the iPads and the FaceTiming, and I keep telling them, I'm like a dinosaur. I'm just like a dinosaur. I'm just coming out. You have to be patient. So this really stood out to me. This particular line stood out to me, because the next sentence says, "The screen may stay on, but life will die out before its time." And so it is that beautiful lesson that we have with regard to the storytelling, you know. But in order to tell the story, we have to wait for the question. And you know, so it's kind of all over the place. But that kind of stood out to me, and I just wanted to share that thought with you. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much for sharing that. That's great. And I think you're so right to say that it's important, and it's up to young people to pose the question. Pope Francis says the same thing when he says, "Young people who do not question the dreams of the old." And so that's an indictment to young people for a lack of curiosity. And whether this might sound like a bit of a chicken or egg question when it comes to who starts the conversation between the young and the old, really, if both are pointing the finger in the other direction, then the conversation may never start. And so it's up to whoever is curious and has those questions to just begin. And I do find that there's something to the witness that can happen. For example, when I speak to my friends about the relationships I have meeting people who are in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and also this past year I met and had very good conversations with 2 people who are older than 100. And when I share these stories, many people are very kind of impressed by them, because it's outside of the horizon of their experience. So it's not that they're necessarily extraordinary encounters, but just the fact that they're happening and that I have a story to share about them is already enough to kind of startle people. And so I think, like, don't underestimate just telling stories about your relationships with other generations, whether within your family or church or any means by which you have these encounters, because it might just not be occurring to people that it's even possible to get outside of the ghettos or the silos of our own demographics.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I would underline is that most young people don't have anyone who listens to them. They really don't. They're involved in so many things, and they don't have anyone who listens to who they are and how they are. And just like that, Dawn asked you, "How are you?" I think that's a great question to open up a conversation with a young person, that an older individual can ask and say, "How are you?" and really listen. And I think there's a real lack of listening in our culture today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Maria, I'm going to bring you in, and you're going to start your video and let us know your question.
Oh, hi there. So I recently was going through, like a minor existential crisis, like people who are trying to work on their careers do, of sort of like, I haven't accomplished anything, I'm not going to accomplish anything, I don't know how to do anything, etc., just kind of catastrophizing. And then I read I was reading the Substack of author I really like, Karen Swallow Prior, and she's older, like she's been in academia for many years, like has this like such a distinguished career, and sort of someone I really look up to. And she wrote in this Substack about how she couldn't figure out how to make just the little picture banner for her email newsletter, and how she sort of had an existential crisis about it, because she felt like, I've learned all these things over the years and now suddenly they're useless in this new digital age. Now, it wasn't actually useless, like she has so much wisdom and knowledge to share, and she is sharing it. And but I was kind of thinking about how, yeah, for me, I wouldn't have been able to write the long eloquent newsletter that she wrote with all the knowledge in it, but I would have been able to design the little graphic thing in Canva, because that's just what we have to do. But I'm kind of wondering, do you think that, like, it really seems to me that the technological jump that we had is something that, I mean, not only just contributes to alienation in society generally, but it seems to really especially make people who had already matured before that happened, like make them feel extra alienated, because they think, I don't know how to use this. Whereas people like myself who grew up with that, is just sort of like the water we swim in. And so I'm wondering, do you think that the technological, I guess, jump like into the computer age, did that increase the alienation? And like, if so, how do we help create more, I guess, analog encounters? Because as good as things like these are, I don't think it's the same as real physical face-to-face encounters.
That is
that's
a
great.
great question. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Maddie, do you want to go first?
Thanks so much, Maria. I really appreciate you being here and sharing that. Well, the answer is definitely not an end to technology. So I'm not going to be offering that solution. Technology and the internet and all of these means are here to stay. And it can be alienating for all different kinds of people. And just the other day, someone was making this comment to me that some people may have trouble accessing information that they need because of the alienation of not being able to really navigate the internet. And that's worth hearing out and taking to heart. And the remedy is, as you say, the encounter, the coming alongside. We need each other. We need each other. I think of that meme going around on Facebook that says, how dare you mock me for not knowing how to use a smartphone? I taught you how to use a spoon. So that parents can kind of have that attitude toward their children. But really, we just need each other. There are things that young people cannot do, that we simply are not adept at. And we need to sit beside an older person and be mentored and accompanied. And older people may need someone to help them fill out an online form, set up a social media profile, get those photos of their grandkids texted to them, whatever it is. I think the solution is just being present enough with each other to figure these things out with a kind of communion between us. So for example, I'm working with Christine right now, the 88-year-old woman I mentioned with the tattoo. Now, she lives in a retirement home. She doesn't have a computer. She doesn't use email, and she cannot really see. And I think she has the power to be a tremendous activist. Everything in our society would say, no, if you don't have email, you can't see, and you don't even have a computer or know how to use the internet, how can you be an activist in this age? But the way that she can is because I went and I interviewed her, and she shared her story, and this story is now online. And today this story was emailed to several thousand people who were able to read it and learn about her and receive her witness because of how it could be amplified by a young person. It takes seeing that value coming alongside and deciding to tell that story. She has an incredible testimony, and I encouraged her to write it out by hand. And then I went over, and with my iPad, she used a magnifying glass to be able to read her handwritten testimony while I sat next to her and typed it up on an iPad. Beautiful. The solution is not ghettos or separate worlds. It's coming alongside and saying, you handwrite it, use your magnifying glass, read it aloud to me, and I'll type it up on this iPad. It's beautiful and it's possible, but it takes coming out of ourselves and realizing that we all have things that we're less adept at and that for which we need each other.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on the other side of that because I started my professional life before computers. And I even remember having to adapt at the law firm to computers and email. We weren't even allowed to email outside the office because it was too dangerous. You could only email in the office to each other. So it's very interesting to see this. I mean, you're laughing, but to see this tremendous hypersonic move towards technology, right? Like the world has changed so much in such a short period of time in terms of communication, but there is a danger that it alienates us, that it's just too easy to stay at home and get on your screen and not go out and meet people and make those appointments for coffee and take time to talk to people in the different areas that you meet them, whether it's at the grocery store or at church or whatever. And I think all of us have to make that effort to meet people, to take time to talk to our friends, to make new friends. But also, I would say, and this is at the other end of it, is to be humble when you can't do something that is, especially when you're older and you're used to being competent, and now all of a sudden you're incompetent in front of some of this technology, and it takes time to learn it and get up the learning curve, and to be able to ask for help and to be able to reach out to other people. And I know Peter has something to say, and he's probably going to tell a good story about technology, right, Peter? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I hit all the pins up.
I don't know if I can talk about technology, but
Okay.
to get down to the initial lady, and I forget her name because I'm an old man. I think number one, having your home open both to your children and their friends and strangers is a key to starting or creating that communication pipeline between the old people and the young people. Part of the problem with old people's homes, many of them have been shut down and you're not allowed to go and visit them. But if you can somehow or the other navigate your way in there, they are charming to deal with. Having said about having your own home open, in our own case, we find the best way to spend time with them is the old-fashioned board games. Nothing like going to a secondhand Salud Army, what's that? Salvation Army or Talese or any of those stores and buying a game for $2 or $5 and playing it with a 5, 10, or 12-year-old. Past that age, they don't want to play games too much.
Oh, no, Peter, they're coming back into fashion. Now there's board game cafes downtown where people go and play board games.
More sophisticated to my way of thinking, you got to be an MBA in game strategy or something like that. But I think that's a big thing. And then just inviting people, during COVID, I don't know how many people, young people, when I say young, I'm going to say under 30, I invited to my house, and over the last 3 years, they've become good friends of mine. They come over now with their girlfriends or their fiancés or their newly married wives, and, they'll say, help me pray a novena so that my wife gets pregnant, or 3 years later, or they'll celebrate that, their wife got pregnant, or all those kind of crazy things that have happened since COVID hit us. But I think just being open and just being audacious, is that what you said, Amanda?
That's right.
I think that's the key. Don't wait for parish programs. Don't wait for programs. Don't even try to start programs.
Just do it
one-on-one. Have them come over. I know most of the women on this platform must be fantastic cookie makers and pie makers and that kind of stuff. Nothing better than a 12-year-old or 14-year-old guy or gal likes more than to bake cookies with a lady who can show him how to bake cookies, and then let him take most of them home and save 2, one for her and one for her husband, or 4, something like that. And I can go on forever, as you know, Nicole, so I'm just going to shut up there, but there's so much opportunity that it's unbelievable. And Linda's put up a hand, so go ahead, Linda.
Thanks, Peter. Over to Linda.
No, it's Diane now, so
Oh,
I'm just going
okay.
to take Peter away and bring Diane down to,
Sure.
yeah, okay, Diane. Oh, you
still-
got to unmute yourself.
Sorry.
That's
I
okay.
just want to share one thing that we've done for the past 2 years. During the pandemic, we didn't get to see our grandchildren very much. For 2 years, we didn't see them, some of them, that because they live right across the province. So we started 2 years ago a camp called Camp Cousins, and they all come to our house. So far, it's just been for one weekend in the summer. We want to expand it as we get more used to it. But the only thing we're doing at the camp is sharing. We pick a theme. Last year it was family. This year it was fathers. And then we tell them the stories of our family. My father died this year, so it was fathers, but we told them a lot about Papa and his traditions and the Italian part of the family. They learned to play bocce ball, and they love bocce ball. And we're just trying to teach them about life through the stories that we have. So that was just something we did. We got a tent, a big huge tent, and they sleep in the tent together, and with some of the aunts and uncles. The whole family comes, even those that don't have children and aren't married. And so it's a fun thing to do, and it's really easy. We thought about moving it to a resort or something as the family's getting bigger, but we decided we'll try to keep it in the house so that we can just have them come to our house and remember that. That was just something that we've done to try to help the elderly and the young get together.
That's great.
Thank
I
you.
think, thinking about traditions and how you can build traditions in your family and have other people come into them can be really important and really grounding for younger people.
Briefly on that, both to what Peter and what Diane shared. Peter, I'm reminded of in high school how the spiritual counselor of the high school said, if you feed them, they will come. And that was her motto, was having chocolate chip cookies, and people always realized they had spiritual issues that they needed to discuss with the counselor when they could smell the warm cookies. So it's so true. And just Diane, thanks for what you shared too. I think it's important to remember that even if someone doesn't say thank you immediately or doesn't seem to be affected by the time you share together, that time shared and those shared experiences leave an imprint on a person's soul, and they come back to the person's memory. I think another thing I would really encourage older people to do is to say to the young people in their lives, when you're going through a hard time and you need someone to talk to, you can reach out. Because that's the kind of thing where in the moment it might be simply spoken and nothing might come of it. But you never know, maybe 6 months, a year down the road, that kind of sentence comes back to a person in a moment of crisis or difficulty. Especially people need people outside of their families. The point about how some people don't have grandchildren, some people don't have children, those are people who can be especially helpful to someone, because we all need people outside of our family, outside of our immediate circles, with whom to share our lives. And that can be a really good context for doing it. Just one last thing, and then I'll come back to you, Nicole, on this, but I'm also struck by how Pope Francis says, but is it true that youth contains the full meaning of life, while old age simply represents its emptying and loss? There are some older people who seem to so lament aging that they unfortunately seem to bear witness to that view that it is simply an emptying and loss. Though it need not be, but some people really display that kind of attitude toward aging. The challenge that I would give is make sure that there is a content there. As we age, we don't want to be found empty and at a loss in our old age. We want to be found robust with, as the poet Rainer Maria Rilke puts it, with a treasure trove of memories, with the ability to have so much to give because we ourselves are full with an existential richness. If we don't have that, then we will not be attractive, but we would rather represent those who seem to age where it is emptying and loss. So just a lot is at stake. A lot depends on our interior cultivation that we pursue.
Yeah, Amanda, I want to jump in on that because I think that is the challenge for everyone is as you go through life is that you're continuing to grow and you're continuing to enrich your interior life. Because if you don't, at the end, you won't have much to give. You will have wasted your life and there won't be much to show for it. But I also would say it's never too late. You can always turn and grow. And so even if you feel like sometimes you look back, you go, what have I been doing? Yes, there's been a lot of wasted opportunities in my life, but how do I go forward from this point on and, grab those opportunities and continue to grow? And whether that's reading good books or having good conversations, or even just spending more time in prayer and reflection and growing my relationship with God, which that's where you get your greatest amount of truth, right? So Linda has something to say again, so we're going to bring her back down here. Okay, Linda.
So I think that is right on. I'm just thinking back to my relationship with my grandparents, and our grandparents were very, as a couple, listened to us. Like the grandchildren really honored them, and they had a place of honor in the family. And because they were always open to listen, they gained the respect of the younger people. They weren't always complaining, oh, I had to take this medication. No, my hip hurts. I had this experience in life. They weren't, bitter over life. And I had a grandparent that was bitter and took that bitterness out on the younger generation. And I could at least compare and say, that grandparent who's bitter, they're losing such a richness in life and sharing with us. I was able at the end to get some of the stories from her, like, her and appreciate her life. And I pray for her every day, even now that she's gone, and prayed for her and she was living and kind of pushed us away. So that goes back to Amanda's comment and what the Pope was saying, and the melancholy thing as well. You have to really put that aside as an older person and reach out to listen to what the younger generation is saying, and you'll gain that place of honor and respect, like as an older person. And I had that in school too. We had like older nuns come into the school, and I remember them coming in and listening to us and sharing faith with us, and those were special moments. You want to create those special moments with the younger people, not something that they'll say, oh no, that was not a comfortable situation to be in.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Thank you so much for that. We're going to go a quick comment from John here and then to Amanda to wrap up. So John, I'm going to bring you in here and floor is yours.
Thanks, Nicole. On the point of honoring the elderly, there is an interesting juxtaposition, I think, that might be at play there. I think that sense of honoring is opposed to people like a gerontocratic system of government, almost, that instead of people holding on to perhaps youth and power and trying to gain esteem through that means, people being able to be a loving grandparent who's really present in their children's life, to lead through a different way, to be present in their grandchildren's life is just such a beautiful thing. I think that we don't, a lot of people would know famous politicians who are older, but how much do they see the elderly in their lives themselves, who are those inspirational people? I just had a little reflection on that. So anyways, that's it.
Great. No, thanks so much. That was awesome. And also I'll just point people to the chat that Robert's made a very interesting comment. I'm just gonna maybe read it and then into the conversation, and then Amanda, you can wrap up with our final prayer. Robert says, I have found that most of the elderly people I have known had a certain serenity. As I am now an elderly person myself, I think more of death and judgment. I'm not morose, but I am living, not knowing the day or the hour. I think this is why more old people go to mass frequently, which reinforces their serenity, which I totally agree with. Okay, Amanda, well,
thank you so much for that comment. And really, to each and every one of you on this call, thank you for joining, because you are putting into practice exactly what Pope Francis is calling for by joining this conversation, which, as you see, is between generations. So here we are incarnating the aspirations of the Holy Father, which I think is very beautiful. Thanks for being here. So I also just want to say that if you didn't have a chance to share, or if thoughts occur to you after this meeting, please feel free to email them. And Nicole and I will read all of your comments, and we'll be able to let those inform our future sessions. So you can always reach out to us anytime in between and share what's on your mind and heart. We'll receive your reflections very gratefully. At this time, I'm going to close with a prayer. And this was a prayer for the Day of Grandparents and Elderly 2023 that we recently celebrated this summer. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Amen. Virgin Mary, Mother of Faith and Hope, an example for this humanity bent by indifference, make me as willing as you to accept the will of God, to magnify and praise his mercy. Mary, Mother of Fortitude, you who knows my heart, do not allow me to become discouraged. I confidently surrender my life into your hands. Heal my wounds, and may your tenderness accompany me on the way. Your presence, Mother of Love, brings us to experience the joy of seeing our families united. Help me to transmit the tenderness and love of God to the grandchildren and youth, so that in addition to praying for them, we can pray for them. Mary, may the gift of the Holy Spirit intercede for me, sustain my weakness, breathe into my heart the consolation, that I may leave traces of faith among the young, bearing witness to the beauty of life, knowing that life has a limit and that beyond it lies before us our Father's embrace. Amen. Father, Amen. Son, Holy Spirit, Amen. So we can share that prayer with you, put together by the dicastery, and we'll be sharing the reading for next time. So again, we welcome your feedback and your reflections, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Good night.
Thank you. God bless.